everyone. This is Classic Amateurs, a podcast where me, Norman, and Raz are talking about classic books. So today we are talking about Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the famous story that inspired many other horror stories, as well as Halloween costumes. So, Raz, are you excited, or should I say electrified, to hear this story?
Yeah, I love it. And I love the choices that you always have. And it's always a pleasure to talk to you on every week. And it's definitely another book that I haven't read, although, and I'm sure we'll get to that. There are plenty of movies, and Frankenstein is part of our culture. So I'm keen to dive into it.
The real Frankenstein is the friendships we made along the way, isn't it? So let's start with some intro around how this book is written, because I think that the context of how Frankenstein was created is not the monster, but the book itself is interesting.
Sure.
So the author is Mary Shelley. She got the idea of Frankenstein at Lake Geneva during a really weird holiday because there was a volcanic eruption. Sunny days turned into a winter, so they had to actually get into a lockdown. And, there's a lot of similarities between them and us because we started this podcast during a lockdown. So I feel like I'm seeing a trend here. Essentially, Mary and the others, Percy Shelley and Lord Byron, apparently had a competition about writing a ghost story. And Mary Shelley took a few days to figure it out. But once she had the idea, she actually made the book and published it under the name Frankenstein, the Modern Prometheus. Were you familiar with this setup?
I didn't know any of the context. Just like many other people, I was under the impression or the false impression that Frankenstein was the monster, and then no remembrance of what the doctor's name was. And I didn't know any of this context.
Just to clear up two educational part here. Number one is what you said, that Frankenstein is the doctor and not the creature. The creature is just called creature. And two, Frankenstein is not the lesser known brother of Albert Einstein, as similar as it sounds. Subtitle of the mod is The Modern Prometheus.
So Prometheus was the guy in Greek mythology that had stolen fire from the gods and brought it to people. Yep. And I believe he was caught by either Zeus or some of the other gods, and he was subjected to torture, which I think he was chained on top of a mountain, and there was this vulture that kept on eating at his liver, and it just kept on regenerating. And it became kind of a metaphor for human existence in general.
But what do you think the fire is metaphor for?
Fire has allowed us to be civilized, right, and has played an important role in our evolution because it allowed us to
technology,
eat meat, exactly,
right?
and speed up our intake of calories and develop these massive brains.
Yeah, so actually, I love that you brought up eating meat, because that's how Mary Shelley interpreted it as well. She actually got so focused on it. In her mind, Prometheus was about non-vegetarian diet, because she was a vegetarian. And fun fact, the monster in the story is vegetarian as well. And besides that, the monster kills people. So I don't know if that's a redeeming quality. But anyway, Mary Shelley proved that vegetarians and vegans were annoying hundreds of years ago already, not just now.
Right, the metaphor of the liver, and I think the acknowledgement that we actually need to make the sacrifice of eating meat, and that meat is associated with fire in our evolution, right? And that this actually plays a damaging role to our liver, if you think about it literally, right? The heaviness of eating meat and probably some of the toxins that you get as a result, and the trade-off with being kind of smart and civilized and being able to build this human existence. It's quite a fascinating thing, right? Revolving around this motive of the liver being eaten up and eventually leading to our death.
Well, you know what? I think that liver damage worth it if you think about a good steak. The main character is named Victor Frankenstein, is like a nobleman born in Italy, studies in Germany, where he decides to create human life. Now, in the story, they stay pretty vague. Obviously, this was a very long time ago, and Mary herself didn't really know the technology behind creating human life. But in the movies, they normally went with the lightning narrative, right? They get the lightning struck the guy and the guy gets up. I'm not really sure why the lightning. Like, the more I think about it, the more confused I am. Like, what's the point? Like, if I pop a dead guy's finger into a socket, is he going to revive? Obviously not. But in the same time, I think about like the radioactive spider biting Peter Parker and turning him into a superhero. Everyone that sells, right? So the Lightning might as well.
I'm wondering what year was this book written, because I remember that, was it Benjamin Franklin that discovered the lightning rod, and there was a lot of discovery in the early 19th century around electricity. So there was a strong conviction that maybe there's something, life itself might
it's
be attached.
1818.
Yeah, right. So right at the beginning,
early 19th century.
Yeah. And there was something really exciting.
I don't know when did Benjamin Franklin, 1752. So it's like 60 years before. So it was probably on common knowledge by then, or somewhat common. And Mary herself was relatively wealthy, so I think she would have had access to this knowledge. There's a lot of question marks here, and to be fair, again, Mary Shelley didn't talk about electricity, but some of the people that lived around her, including a guy named Aldini, was experimenting with resurrecting humans, and that's where probably electricity played a bit of part. So what happens in the story is that Victor creates this creature made out of different body parts stitched together, and this is like a 6-foot creature, and you can imagine when someone stitches you together, you're not looking very pretty. So no one is surprised that when the creature actually comes alive, Victor gets a bit spooked and runs away.
But do we know what the motivation of the doctor was?
He wanted to create life because he was a scientist. So he was the Elon Musk of his time.
A follower of the alchemists in some way, which were fascinated with the philosopher's stone.
They actually talk about alchemy a little bit, and he basically calls it bullshit. But then he uses his vacuum cleaner socket to resurrect the guy. So, Victor obviously ghosting the creature, his newborn, upsets the creature himself and runs away. Now, you are the creature and you run away. What do you think the first thing you will do after this happens?
Call the police?
Well, you are a 6 feet lumbering, ugly monster. You won't be able to call the police. Let's say you are the monster,
not the doctor. Well,
yeah.
Interesting. But I'm wondering why he was running away. Was he afraid, or was he?
Sure. I mean, it's basically a newborn, right? Like he's having issues of walking, talking, thinking. He's just kind of confused, right? So he runs away. I'll spoil it if you don't mind. The first thing the monster does is he learns French, because that's the easy thing to do, right? That's what babies do. So he hides in a shed, in an abandoned shed besides a farm, and he overhears the local peasants talk in French, and he picks it up because obviously that's so easy to pick up French.
Human sponge.
And then exactly. And then he obviously makes a massive mistake straight away. Do you know what that mistake is?
Accent makes mistake in French can be quite fatal.
He tries to get along with these French people, right? So
big mistake.
And having the looks of 15 botched surgeries, plastic surgeries, it is not helping you make friends in the French motherland, and he gets chased away. And then he gets into a few other altercations, which I don't really need to get into. But long story short, he starts to kill people, and that's when the whole revenge story gets interesting. And after all, the Frankenstein is a revenge story.
Whose revenge on who? Is it the revenge of people against the monster, or is it the monster's revenge on people for making him and kind of attacking him to begin with, right? And having this...
Well, it's a revenge of the creature against Victor, his creator.
Okay, yeah.
So one of the key themes is that Victor was the name that I believe in Paradise Lost was used to replace the word God. So there's this whole symbolism that Victor is the God and the creature is human, and the creature gets angry at God because God abandons him, and then suit follows.
Just want a small parenthesis to our previous episode, which talked about Viktor Frankl. No connection.
Could be. Probably nothing. It's a revenge story similar to Count of Monte Cristo, or similar to Leonardo DiCaprio's Revenant, if you're familiar with, or even Odyssey, right? So
I love a good revenge story. It's a full arc, isn't it? I think Les Miserables is also a revenge story.
I don't know. I really hate the Les Miserables. I think it's the worst story ever written.
Have you read the novel, or just seen the movies?
Just the movie. And I watched Les Miserables in the theater in Finnish with Swedish subtitles. And for anyone who is listening, I don't speak Finnish or Swedish. So I just hated it.
Of course.
I think it's just a really depressing story. It might be a revenge story. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry to hear that. It's one of my favorite books, and we'll talk about it some other time. But cool, let's go back on track. Revenge stories.
How about no?
Yeah.
Anyway, one thing leads to another, and our heroes end up in the Arctic Circle. Because why not Arctic Circle? They couldn't settle their differences in a sunny island sipping cocktails, couldn't they? So, and that's when the story ends. Essentially, I don't want to spoil it, but it's not a happy ending. How familiar are you with Frankenstein? Have you watched any of the movies?
Yeah.
Have you read any parts of the book?
The movies. Oh my God, there are some versions of this movie. There's some stuff that really I shouldn't have been watching as a child, probably a late night program. There's this image, and I remember we got HBO, and there was a scene in that movie where Frankenstein was effectively so grotesque. I can't even describe it. It's too bad. It's so explicit. Anyway, he kills a woman, to put it short, but the way he kills it is extremely grotesque, and it's just part of a whole set, probably, of interpretations of basically the inhumane way of behaving for this creature, right? That has no empathy and is able to kill in the most gruesome ways.
Yeah, so I guess that actually fits the main story as well. And to be honest, if any of our listeners are interested in checking out Frankenstein, I probably would recommend checking out the movies instead of the book, because the book itself is very difficult to read. It is a very good story, but it's written in like letter format, if you're familiar with that.
Never had the impulse to.
That's okay. It's a very outdated writing style. Dracula was written in letter format, as well as Stephen King's Carrie, apparently, which I haven't read, but I was just checking it out. And the idea is that you're not really reading a narrative, but you're reading someone's letter to another person. Like you could create a novel that's based on emails, right? And you just read email from email. So that's kind of the format. It is incredibly tedious, to be honest. Although the story is really good ultimately. Like when you read the synopsis on Wikipedia, it kicks ass, right? It's the whole revenge story is awesome.
Just on the format, in a way, I think the downside of that format is that you get this immense lag in terms of feedback of actually knowing what's happening, because you have someone's version, and then right you get this next iteration, and so on and so on. It's like in the 19th century where people didn't get news for months, and they found out the whole story eventually, right? So the suspension, it probably breeds suspense, but it's a delayed gratification.
Yeah, there is narrative bottleneck with letters, because it has to be written by someone, right, who witnessed or at least heard about what happened. And second, they have to write from their point of view, so you lose that objectivity that you would get from just like a story that's told in a nice linear way. Right, so and then you can add all the like mannerisms, the stuff that people say in letters that are more or less just fillers. So you get these like musings and play of thoughts until you actually get to the point of what they are trying to say. So yeah, it's not very fun to read, honestly. It is a great story though. And I think over the years, many Halloween costumes and movies actually have covered it much better than Mary Shelley could. And I don't blame Mary for that, because I think she was just a gal of her time, and she did well.
Well, I did Halloween last year, and I have to say I didn't see Frankenstein as being as popular as it used to be. I wonder why.
Shame. Frankenstein is great. That's all I have for you for today. Do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, more like, when did you come across this book? Is it something you read when you were younger? What age did you read this book at?
I read it a few years ago. I had a binge of reading classic stories, and this included Frankenstein, Jekyll and Hyde. I tried reading Dracula, but I failed at that.
I did listen to another book this week, but it was not a book that we will discuss. It's a parenting book. Well, who knows? Maybe one day. And there's something about kind of horror. How horrific is this book? How explicit is it? Because given where it's still written in an age where I believe, right, of censorship, right? How much is it actually descriptive of what's happening versus how much the movies later on kind of developed on and became really generally explicit in the grotesque element and the human carnal.
It's not as gruesome as the movies. They do talk about people getting killed, but I don't think the monster really details as to what exactly he does. Like they probably talk about blood, but that's as far as it goes. I think the most horrific scenes and the most haunting scenes in the story are the Arctic Circle scenes, and not because of the brutality of the killings, but rather than the desperation that everyone has around, because that's how the movie starts and ends, right? They are in the Arctic Circle and there's a ship stuck in the ice and people are dying. They are just starving, they are freezing. And that atmosphere is biting. And that kind of like makes the whole horror aspect way scarier. It's almost like if you ever watched The Thing,
Yeah.
like the scary like Arctic style is almost more haunting than the monster himself. Once the monster comes up, you're like, okay, that's a monster. But although the monster is pretty scary as well, so whatever.
Yeah, and maybe just to close, then I'm just curious, why would anyone want to read this book today? Why would you? If you were to do a pitch, a 20-second pitch to someone, just to close it off.
Well, as I said, the book is written in letter format. So if you're interested in older formats of how books were written, then I definitely recommend it. The story itself is actually pretty good. Besides some of the musings and gimmicks that appear in this format, I think you can enjoy it quite a bit, especially if you find an abridged version. I would probably not recommend listening to it in audio format because the language itself is quite archaic. Other than that, yeah, it's a cool story. It's a mix of sci-fi through electricity and horror through all this like crazy scenes and murders.
Why not?
I actually think it's one of the better classic books. Yeah, it's one of the better classic books.
It's gripping, isn't it? Yeah, awesome. Mm-hmm. Well, thanks for sharing that.
Oh, good. And thank you for joining our podcast, and we'll catch up with you next week. Take care.